Alastair Campbell, good afternoon.
How are you, Richard?
Yeah, welcome. What's your reaction to this latest development?
Well, it just sort of piles disgust on top of disgust, I think. The fact is that Paul Dacre has basically told the editor-in-chief of the Mail and the Mail on Sunday, I think, didn't want Geordie Greig to apologise. Geordie Greig probably does have a little bit more decency, has apologised. But, you know, it's being blamed on two young journalists. The fact is this is about a culture within that newspaper, and the person who's responsible for that culture is Paul Dacre. The owner of that newspaper is Lord Rothermere. Dacre has run rings around Rothermere for years, and as soon as Rothermere finds a spine and a bit of moral decency and does something about Dacre and gets him out of there, the better.
Well, I don't think you say run rings around him. I think Lord Rothermere's management style is just to be hands-off, isn't it? It's just to let him manage the paper.
When David English was there, I think it was fair to say that English and Dacre, between them, there was a bit of a yin and a yang, and David English was quite a civilising force. And I think that since then, Rothermere on the sort of social circuit kind of goes, and his wife go around sort of saying, oh, you know, embarrassed by the paper and some of the things that it does, but Dacre is a law unto himself. And let's just understand that, as I say, at least Geordie Greig has had the decency to apologise. I don't know whether it was actually just a low-level decision.
They've apologised pretty quickly.
Yes, they have.
Suspended two journalists.
Right, but why in that case is Dacre still defending the article that sparked this off? The deputy editor only admitted that the using the grave with that rather stupid and offensive pun headline in the coverage of the story about Ed's dad was an error of judgment. But they're still standing by this ridiculous, putrid, nasty, unpleasant article that said that Ralph Miliband hated Britain. Well, I mean, I knew Ralph Miliband, and I know that he didn't hate Britain, and so does anybody who knew him. And so,
I think isn't their point? Wasn't their point really? I know they seized on a diary entry from when he was 17, when he'd arrived here from Belgium in the 1930s. Which just seems like shaky foundations on which to build their premise. But there are a lot of people more broadly that think that people with Marxist beliefs were at odds with much of what Britain stood for and stands for. I mean, isn't there a general point that people like the Daily Mail and people who read the Daily Mail probably do think that Marxists didn't really like the Britain that they like?
The point is, look, I don't believe in God. I don't go to church. Part of his offence, apparently, was the fact that he was an atheist. There are lots of people in this country who aren't monarchists. That doesn't make them anti-British. It means that they're anti-monarchy. There are lots of people in this country who, lots of them are sadly in the cabinet, who don't particularly like the National Health Service. It doesn't make them anti-British. It makes them have a different political view. But the point is, he was only being written about at all because he was the dead father of a current political leader. And the problem with Dacre is so devoid of any genuine moral compass other than this really sort of warped and twisted, narrow view of the world that he has, and the belief that he should attack and undermine anybody who doesn't share it, that he can't see why people would have taken offence at this. And of course, because like most bullies, he's a complete coward. He's now gone to ground, and he's put Geordie Greig up to deal with this, and he put that deputy editor up to deal with it on Newsnight. And I've launched a petition on change.org today to say to Dacre he should come out and defend himself on television, the same way that anybody who is at the centre of a media storm is expected to by people like him.
Do you think that he is, though, in many ways, and you hear a lot of people say this in the industry who don't like what the Daily Mail stands for, they will still acknowledge that he's a brilliant newspaper editor.
No, what they'll acknowledge is that the Daily Mail is a huge commercial success.
Yeah, but largely because of Paul Dacre. How many newspapers are a commercial success anymore?
I agree. Listen, you can't take away the commercial success that he's presided over, but you've got to ask yourself about the values and the journalism that underpin that. I mean, look, if you looked at an armed gang that were going around the streets mugging people, and they mugged more people than every other armed gang.
That's illegal, though, but that's a different thing.
Okay, but I'm talking about what he does as an editor, to me, is devoid of any sense of right or wrong, as Ed said about the initial statement. And the thing about leadership is what creates a culture. So those journalists who went into that hospital and thought that it was a good thing to try and talk to grieving relatives of Ed's uncle at this event yesterday, to which they weren't invited, they thought that was the way to get on in that newspaper. And the reason they thought that is because it is. Because there is no limit to what they will do in pursuit of stories. And people go on about, when you look at their website, which, yes, is commercially successful, but actually in terms of what it panders to and what it plays to, it's revolting. I mean, his kind of obsession with women and cellulite, and I mean, it's just, you can't even say it's serious journalism.
But you can say that it's the most, I think, is it not now the biggest...
It's the most visited news website in the world.
In the world.
That's successful.
Is there a bit of you that begrudgingly admires him as an editor? Begrudgingly respects an aspect of what he does?
No, I can't deny that commercially he's presided over a success. I'm a great admirer of the quality of resilience and people who just sort of keep going and what have you. But I do think he's now whole below the waterline. I think he's about to hit the buffers because eventually, look, this is going to hit the Daily Mail's credibility pretty hard. Most decent people, I mean, I say, for example, every time I fly British Airways and people thrust the Daily Mail into my hand, and I say, you know, I get offended by it, and I think most decent people don't want to have anything to do with it. And I think that people should really think long and hard about reading it, about advertising in it, about having anything to do with it, because what you've seen in the last few days is something that people like me who've had to deal with the Daily Mail for the last however many years it is, we've known for years, that it's putrid, that actually it doesn't care about people, and he Alastair, is the man who hates Britain, not Ed Miliband's dad.
Just stay there a sec, Alastair. Amanda Hutton has been found guilty of starving her 4-year-old son to death. Hamza Khan died in 2009 but wasn't found until 21 months later. It's a big story, a big case. We thought the jury was about to come back, so we will bring you more on this shortly. But that's the headline, that Amanda Hutton's been found guilty of starving her 4-year-old son to death. Alastair, Jeremy Paxman was in my studio earlier, and we were talking about Miliband versus the Mail. And he was wondering, he wasn't expressing an opinion because he's on the BBC, but he was wondering, a leader, a theoretical prime minister in waiting who emotes like that, you know, he looked quite emotional. He was wondering if that's something that the British public are comfortable with in a prime minister.
Well, people say that what they want from their politicians and their leaders is a sense of authenticity, and I think that's right. And look, I've talked to Ed every day through this whole thing because I think he knows that I've been through quite a lot of these storms and frenzies with the media, and he just sort of picks my brains. And I mean, he thought long and hard about the initial response, but I think that, as David Cameron, I think, rightly said, and as Nick Clegg has rightly said, I think there are some things that just go beyond any limit of decency that most people have. And trashing the reputation of your father just because you happen to be leader of the Labour Party, and saying, when you know him obviously as well as Ed and his brother David do, and don't forget, you know, there's a widow still alive who hates all this sort of stuff being played around, but Ed wouldn't do that without feeling that he had to. And then to have this on top of it, I think there comes a point in some of these things where you just cannot leave it lie. You have to in a sense get out there and fight for what you believe in. So I think Jeremy's being unfair there in that if he's suggesting that in a sense this was some sort of deliberate use of emotion, Ed was genuinely upset by that and felt that he had to do something.
Do you think that people are still scared of the Daily Mail? This is a theory. This is a theme at Leveson a bit, and I wondered. I was looking at certain government figures talking about this story, and they all seem to use more or less the same line as if they'd been briefed, which was to say any son would want to defend their father, but they didn't really go any further than that.
Yeah, well, some of them have. I thought John Moore and Michael Heseltine yesterday.
Yes, they did. That's true. Do you think politicians are still scared of the Mail?
No, I think there are people within the Conservative cabinet who are genuine right-wing libertarians who basically feel the newspapers should be allowed to do what the hell they want. And don't forget Michael Gove, who's been their biggest cheerleader. He is, you know, probably in the hopeful event that they lose the election, he's going to go back to journalism. His wife is a star columnist on the Daily Mail. That point was never made last night. And so I just think that there are different political views about this. But all I say, I can remember I think it was back in the late 90s, and I'll be honest, I haven't had a conversation with Paul Dacre since I think it was 1999, because, you know, there came a point, we tried to have sort of proper, sensible dialogue. But it's impossible. The guy twists everything, cheats, they publish any old rubbish just to peddle their lines. I hold him, if there's anybody listening here who's got measles down in Wales, I think Dacre and some of the other editors played a massive part in that in relation to the MRR scandal.
Well, there are also quite a lot of local papers involved in that.
Yes, there
in
might
Wales.
have been, but they follow a lead. And the thing about he is one of the central leadership figures in the industry. He's a bully. He's a coward. You talk about people being scared. You're only scared of a bully if you let them bully you.
Did you put his address on Twitter?
No, I didn't. What I did was I pointed out that he had a 15,600-acre estate in Scotland, and it's well known where it is, because he's always going on about how much...
Well, did you give out you didn't give out the address?
No, I gave out... What I did do is I asked whether there were any camera crews in the area of a street in London. That's what I did, because I was trying to find a camera crew.
Sorry, Alice, I slightly missed what you were saying there because my producer was talking to me. You're saying you didn't give out his address for either of his homes?
Well, one, everybody in the media ought to know where major public figures live, although, of course, editors have this sort of, unwritten trade union closed-shop rule that they don't go after.
But did you put his home address on Twitter?
I put on Twitter, are there any cameras in the area? Unless you want me to, I won't say what the street was. And I put the name of the street because I was trying to find a camera crew because he was about to leave, and I thought it was about time he knew what it was like to get doorstepped.
Isn't that bullying a little bit?
No, it's not. It's actually, look, if this is what happens with these guys. If this was any other story, if it was a banker, if it was a vicar, if it was a teacher, if it was a soldier, let alone if it was a politician, you lot would be all over the central figures like a rash. You'd have camera crews staked out everywhere he'd go. But he's Paul Dacre, he's the editor of the Daily Mail. We don't dog doesn't eat dog and all the rest of it. The great thing about social media now is that actually these newspapers no longer have total and sole control of the way that the debate develops. This is a big story. It's a proper story. It's a story of genuine public interest. The reason I've launched that debate today, the reason I call him a coward, is because he ought to have the guts to debate in public his role in public life and his role in this story in particular.
Alastair Campbell, thank you.